The Illyrian request was laughed out of the Federation Council chambers. But the humans weren't laughing now, not with Crodan warships demolishing their frontier defenses. For centuries, the Illyrian Empire had been a fading power, its reach shrinking with each passing decade as aggressive neighbors invaded and annexed its outer systems. Desperate to halt the erosion of their once great civilization, Illyrian leader Merrick Kellor traveled to Earth to plead for an alliance with humanity. Ambassador Roger Wilson listened politely as the frail alien described his people's plight. But looking at Merrick's diminutive frame, barely half the size of an adult human, it was hard to see how the Illyrians could be useful allies. Their outdated ships and shrinking economy held little value. Wilson refused the alliance, unwilling to entangle Earth in the Illyrians' many conflicts with stronger alien races. Merrick returned home dejected, his hopes dashed. Then the Crodans invaded. Huge armored war fleets smashed through the Illyrian picket ships on the border and seized a dozen worlds in a matter of days. The Illyrian Council sent panicked distress calls to every spacefaring race, humans included. This time, they found a more receptive audience. Earth's military analysts realized that the Crodans wouldn't stop at conquering the Illyrian systems. Their empire would become a staging ground for an eventual assault on human space. Grudgingly, Roger Wilson contacted Merrick and promised military aid in exchange for trade concessions and Illyrian technological secrets. Within a week, a joint human-Illyrian fleet challenged the Crodan vanguard, the sleek human attack ships screening the smaller but more advanced Illyrian craft. The Allied forces stopped the invasion in its tracks, shocking the Crodans with the sheer power the humans brought to bear. But countless Crodan warships waited in reserve, and the Illyrian core worlds remained under siege. Only together did humans and Illyrians have a prayer of survival. The two species began coordinating their forces, Illyrian technical wizardry working in tandem with human ships and soldiers. As the war ground on, Roger Wilson and Merrick Kellor knew both their civilizations' fates hung in the balance. Old arguments and prejudices had to be set aside. Against all odds, they had to find a way to merge their strengths and stand fast against a pitiless foe, or else watch everything they fought for burn under alien guns. Roger smacked his head on the conference table. We need more ships, more troops, more everything. He looked at Merrick. These supply lines we're establishing to your core worlds are being harried every step of the way. We need to shut down these Crodan staging areas before they shut us down. Merrick nodded, his small frame seeming to shrink even further. I agree. My forces are holding the line, but barely. We must disrupt their ability to bring reinforcements to the front. Rogers leaned back, running a hand through his hair. I'll talk to Earth Command. See if we can spare some strike teams to hit those staging points. Meanwhile, let's get those additional ships and defenses in place. If we can just buy ourselves some breathing room. But the Crodans weren't about to give them a chance to catch their breath. Mere days later, reports flooded in of massive Crodan offensives on multiple fronts. Outposts fell, supply lines were severed, and the front was suddenly everywhere. Then came the hammer blow. A huge Crodan battle fleet dropped out of warp right on top of Ilaria Prime. The skies filled with the angular shapes of their warships, disgorging armies of hulking Crodan warriors onto the planet's surface. Rogers and Merrick rushed back to Ilaria, arriving to find the planet embroiled in brutal urban combat. Towering Crodan soldiers rampaged through the streets, their armor shrugging off the desperate fire of the outmatched Illyrian defenders. The presidential district was soon in danger of being overrun entirely. Merrick gathered his personal guard, determined to make a last stand at the steps of the Presidium itself. We may fall, he told them grimly, but we will teach the Crodans the cost of setting foot on Illyrian soil. Rogers wasn't about to let his diminutive ally fight alone. He called in every ship, every soldier that could possibly reach Ilaria in time. He'd beg, borrow, and steal reinforcements from every command area if he had to. The Crodan forces advanced, their victory seemingly assured. Merrick and his soldiers fought like the heroes of old, but it was a losing battle. The Presidium doors were about to shatter under the enemy's assault. Suddenly, the Krodan line staggered as if struck by a thunderbolt. Human drop pods rained from the sky, slamming into the heart of the enemy formations. The pods burst open, disgorging squads of human commandos armed to the teeth. The humans attacked with shocking ferocity, their advanced weapons cutting through Krodan armor like paper. Rogers was among them, leading a squad to punch through to the Presidium. "Marek, looks like you could use a hand," Rogers called out as his squad fought their way up the Presidium steps. "I had the situation under control," Marek replied dryly, "but I suppose I can let you share some of the glory." With human reinforcements pouring in and Illyrian soldiers rallying, the tide began to turn. The Allies clashed with the Krodan troops in vicious street fighting, retaking the city block by blood-soaked block. Finally, the Krodans fell back, their attack blunted, but the cost had been immense. Illyria's gleaming capital lay in ruins, the dead beyond counting. Rogers and Marek stood amidst the rubble, suddenly understanding the scale of the war that had begun. This was no border skirmish. It was a battle for survival. The Krodans would not stop until they ruled Illyria, and Earth would surely be next. "We can't keep fighting on the defensive," Rogers said. "We need to strike back. Hit their supply lines, their shipyards, anything to weaken their ability to make war." "Agreed," Marek replied. "But to do that, we'll need more than just Earth and Illyria. We need allies." So began a desperate diplomatic mission, racing from world to world in search of support. Many of Illyria's vassals were hesitant to draw the wrath of the Krodans. In palace after palace, Rogers made his case. "The Krodans won't stop with us," he warned. "You'll be next. We have to stand together." Marek sweetened the deal with a shocking offer: mutual defense pacts with Earth itself. "Even if we fall," he vowed, "Earth will ensure your independence survives." One by one, the Illyrian tributary worlds agreed. Ships and soldiers began to gather, a coalition fleet capable of facing the Krodan armada head-on. But even as the Allies prepared their counterattack, terrifying news arrived. The Krodans had discovered an ancient alien shipyard capable of churning out warships at a staggering pace. If they took control of it, they could bury the Allied fleet in sheer numbers. Rogers and Marek looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. The battle for that shipyard could decide the fate of humanity and all alien species. There was no choice. Whatever the cost, whatever the odds, they had to reach that shipyard first. The entire war hinged on it. Roger Wilson paced the deck of his flagship, the tension evident in every step. He turned to Marek, his Illyrian counterpart. "We can't let the Krodans activate those shipyards. If they do, this war is over before it begins." Marek nodded, his small frame belying the weight of responsibility he carried. "Agreed. But we cannot leave our worlds undefended. The Krodan fleets press us hard even now." "Then we split our forces," Wilson said. "I'll take a strike team to the shipyards. You hold the line here." Within hours, Wilson's battle group jumped to hyperspace, flanked by sleek Illyrian stealth ships. The journey was fraught with danger. Krodan patrols forced them to drop out of hyperspace repeatedly, engaging in brief, intense firefights before jumping again. Finally, they arrived at the ancient shipyards, Wilson's expression resolute as he saw Krodan ships already in orbit. "We're too late," he muttered. But there was no time for regret. Wilson's voice rang out over the comms. "All ships, commence planetary invasion. We take those shipyards or die trying." Drop pods rained from the sky, human marines and Illyrian shock troops hitting the ground running. The Krodans had dug in, turning the sprawling industrial complexes into fortresses. Wilson led from the front, plasma rifle in hand. "Push forward," he shouted as energy bolts sizzled past. His troops advanced street by street, building by building, paying in blood for every inch. But even as they gained ground, Wilson saw the first Krodan warships rising from the reactivated shipyards. "We need to shut this down now," he growled. He assembled an elite strike team, his best human officers and the deadliest Illyrian spec ops. Their target, the Central Control Nexus. They fought their way through the war-torn cityscape, dodging Kroden patrols and surviving vicious ambushes. At last, they reached the control center, only to find it swarming with Kroden elite guards. "Breach and clear!" Wilson ordered. They burst in, a storm of gunfire and energy blasts. The humans and Illyrians fought with desperate courage, outnumbered but refusing to yield. Wilson spotted the main control panel. "Cover me!" he yelled, sprinting for it. A Kroden warrior loomed before him. Wilson ducked under its massive swing, then drove his combat knife up under its chin. He reached the controls, fingers flying over the alien interface. Alarms blared as the shipyard's systems began to shut down. Suddenly, the building shook. "Sir!" his comms officer shouted. "Massive Kroden counterattack incoming!" Wilson gritted his teeth. They were out of time and options. "All units, fall back to extraction point." They fought their way out of the control center, Kroden forces closing in from all sides. Wilson's team was moments from being overrun when the sky lit up with fire. The Illyrian stealth ships decloaked, their energy weapons carving swaths through the Krodan ranks. Under this covering fire, Wilson and his forces made it to their shuttles, blasting off with the shipyards dark behind them. Meanwhile, on the Illyrian front, Merrick's fleet waged a desperate battle. His ships danced and weaved through Kroden formations, their advanced tech allowing them to punch far above their weight. But the Krodans kept coming. Merrick watched grimly as another of his ships vanished in a ball of fire. How much longer could they hold? Then came the news. Wilson had taken the shipyards. A cheer went up across the Illyrian fleet. They had bought the time needed at a terrible cost. But before they could savor the victory, a Kroden envoy hailed them under a flag of truce. Merrick listened to their offer with growing dread. Cede their core worlds, including Ilaria Prime itself, or face utter annihilation. His council was divided. "We cannot survive much more of this," one argued. "Perhaps we should accept their terms." Merrick was torn. Then a transmission came through. It was Wilson. "Don't give up yet," the human said, a fierce grin on his face. "I've got a plan." Wilson's fierce grin faded as he listened to the Kroden terms. He shook his head. "No deal. We didn't come this far to roll over now." Merrick's eyes widened. "What do you propose?" Wilson pulled up a holo map, zooming in on a distant star system. "Intel shows the Kroden homeworlds are practically undefended. They threw everything at us, leaving their back door wide open. I say we kick it down." "You want to invade Kartak?" Merrick's voice was incredulous. "That's madness." "It's our best shot," Wilson countered. "We take their capital. We can force an unconditional surrender. It's risky, but the alternative is a slow death." Merrick paced, his tail twitching nervously. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. We stake everything on one last throw of the dice." The newly christened Allied Expeditionary Force set out at once. As they neared Kroden space, Kroden patrols harried them relentlessly. Wilson stood on the bridge of his flagship, barking orders as enemy ships flashed past. "Evasive maneuvers. Don't let them ping our position." After a grueling gauntlet run, they finally dropped out of slipstream in orbit around Kartak. Wilson wasted no time. "All units, commence planetary invasion." Drop pods streaked through the atmosphere. Wilson's pod slammed into the ground with bone-jarring force. He kicked the hatch open, plasma rifle at the ready. "Move! Move! Secure that ridge!" Human Marines and Illyrian shock troops poured from their pods, trading fire with Krodan defenders. Wilson ducked behind a low wall as energy bolts sizzled overhead. "Push forward, we need that beachhead." For hours, they fought tooth and nail to expand their perimeter. Krodan artillery pounded their positions as dropships brought in tanks and heavy weapons. The urban sprawl became a meat grinder, block by block fighting amid shattered buildings. Wilson crouched in the burnt-out shell of an apartment complex, studying tactical readouts. "We're bogged down. Time for Plan B." He keyed his comm. "Cyber warfare teams, you're up. Get me control of those defense grids." A mixed squad of human hackers and Illyrian tech wizards infiltrated the central command bunker. They fought their way through Krodan's security, finally reaching the main control room. "We're in," the team leader reported. "Reprogramming defenses now." Suddenly, Kartak's automated turrets and missile batteries swiveled, opening fire on their own troops. Caught in the crossfire, Krodan forces fell back in disarray. Wilson seized the moment. "All armored units, push for the city center. Go, go, go!" He clambered atop a hovering battle tank as it surged forward. Energy bolts pinged off its armor as they smashed through crumbling Krodan defenses. Street after street fell to the Allied advance. Finally, they breached the government district. Wilson led a squad into the imposing high command building. They fought room to room, subduing the last pockets of resistance. In the war room, Wilson faced down the Krodan Supreme Commander. "It's over," he said simply. "Surrender, or watch your empire burn." With their leadership captured and their capital in flames, the Krodans had no choice. One by one, Krodan fleets and armies laid down their arms. The war was won, but as Wilson surveyed the devastation, victory tasted like ashes. Millions of Krodan civilians lay dead in the rubble. His own troops looked shell-shocked, the horrors of urban combat etched in their eyes. "Was it worth it?" Merrick asked softly, joining him atop a ruined tower. Wilson gazed out over the scarred cityscape. "It had to be done, but now comes the hard part, building a lasting peace." Merrick nodded. "Together then, human and Illyrian, as equal partners." "Together," Wilson agreed, extending his hand. As Merrick clasped it, both knew a new chapter in galactic history had begun. Returning home, they were hailed as conquering heroes. But amid the celebration, Wilson caught whispers of new threats lurking in the shadows. He squared his shoulders, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The Alliance would endure, stronger than ever. The acrid stench of burning fuel and charred flesh hung heavy in the air, as Roger Wilson surveyed the aftermath of the latest Krodan rebel attack. Twisted metal and shattered bodies littered the dusty plains of Kartak. He clenched his fists, rage and guilt warring within him. "How many?" he asked, his voice tight. A young lieutenant consulted her datapad. 17 dead, sir, 32 wounded, mostly civilians." Wilson cursed under his breath. These attacks were growing bolder, more vicious. He turned to see Merrick approaching, the Illyrian's normally pristine robes stained with dirt and blood. "That was too close," and Wilson said. "Are you all right?" Merrick nodded, his large eyes haunted. "I am unharmed, but these people—" He gestured to the carnage around them. "It ends now," Wilson growled. "I want every available unit mobilized. We're going to hunt down these bastards and put them down for good." Merrick placed a restraining hand on Wilson's arm. "Roger, wait. More violence will only breed more resentment. We need to win hearts and minds, not—" "Enough!" Wilson snapped, shrugging off Merrick's touch. "I'm done playing nice. You almost died today. How many more have to die before you realize diplomacy isn't working?" Before Merrick could respond, Wilson's comm unit crackled to life. "Sir, urgent transmission from Earth. The Senate is in emergency session." Wilson's fists tight. He'd been dreading this. "Patch it through." The holographic image of Senator Hawkins, a known anti-alien hardliner, flickered into view. His face was a mask of righteous anger. "Commander Wilson, the Senate demands an explanation for this continued bloodshed. How many more human lives must be sacrificed in alien wars?" Wilson fought to keep his voice level. "Senator, the situation is complex. We're making progress, but—" "Progress?" Hawkins scoffed. "All I see is dead humans and aliens running amok. It's time to bring our boys home and let these creatures sort out their own mess." "With all due respect, Senator," Wilson countered, "abandoning our allies now would be disastrous. The power vacuum would—" "Allies?" Hawkins spat the word like a curse. "Wake up, Wilson. These aliens are using us. For all we know, they engineered this whole conflict. I have evidence of secret weapons caches." "That's enough!" Wilson shouted, his patience snapping. Your xenophobic conspiracy theories have no place in this discussion. We have a responsibility. The transmission cut off abruptly. Wilson turned to see Merrick staring at him, his alien features unreadable. Your people grow weary of this alliance, Merrick said softly. Wilson ran a hand through his hair. They don't understand. If we leave now, everything we fought for will be lost. Before Merrick could respond, alarms blared across the compound. A breathless aide rushed up to them. Sirs, multiple unknown vessels just dropped out of hyperspace in the outer system. They're massive. Wilson and Marique exchanged grim looks. They rushed to the command center where a holographic display showed a swarm of sleek, blue-tinged warships advancing inexorably toward Kartak. What the hell are those? Wilson muttered. A transmission crackled through, and a towering blue-skinned humanoid appeared on screen. His bearing radiated arrogance and disdain. I am Lord Vranusk of the Varn Imperium, the alien intoned. Your primitive conflict has destabilized this sector. We are here to restore order. Wilson bristled at the condescending tone. This is sovereign territory. You have no authority. Vranusk's laughter cut him off. Authority? You backwards creatures barely understand the concept. You will withdraw all forces from Croden space immediately and submit to Varn oversight. Refusal will be met with overwhelming force. The transmission cut off, leaving Wilson and Merrick in stunned silence. The human commander turned to his alien counterpart, seeing his own shock and anger mirrored in those large eyes. What do we do? Merrick asked quietly. Wilson's mind raced. They were exhausted, their forces depleted. But to give in now, he made his decision. We fight, he said grimly. Alert all commands. I want every ship, every soldier ready for battle. We didn't come this far to roll over for some blue-skinned bullies. Merrick hesitated. Roger, perhaps we should consider their terms. My people have no stomach for another war. Wilson grabbed Merrick's shoulders, forcing the Illyrian to meet his gaze. Listen to me. If we give in now, it's over. They'll never leave. We'll be slaves or extinct within a generation. We have to make a stand, here and now. Merrick stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. Together, then. As they turned to begin preparations, a junior officer burst into the room. Sirs, Varn dropships are entering the atmosphere. They're heading for New Crota City. Wilson's eyes hardened. Scramble all fighters. I want every anti-aircraft battery online. We're going to give these Varn bastards a welcome they won't forget. The next hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Wilson stood on the command deck of his flagship, watching as human and Illyrian forces engaged the Varn landing parties. Energy weapons lit up the night sky as fighters clashed in vicious dogfights. For a moment, it seemed they might repel the initial assault. But then Vranusk's main fleet arrived in orbit, unleashing a torrent of destructive power that dwarfed anything Wilson had ever seen. As Varn warships decimated their defensive lines, Wilson turned to Merrick. The weight of impossible odds pressed down on them both. Well, Wilson said with a grim smile, got any brilliant ideas? Merrick's eyes narrowed in thought. Perhaps, but it's risky. We'd need to...
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.